It started with an unexpected invitation. The letter arrived at my office, neatly typed on the thick paper with no return address. The envelope had a strange weight to it, as though whatever was inside carried significance far beyond the ink and paper. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I had never heard of the architect whose name was scrawled at the bottom, but something about the tone of the letter, polite but insistent, compelled me to follow through. I was invited to tour a house designed apparently just for me. It sounded like a prank or some kind of avant-garde sales pitch. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe it was the way the architect described the house, as a reflection of my life, my decisions. It seemed absurd, and yet there was something alluring about the idea. A house built from my memories. I had no idea how he could claim to know anything about me, but I needed to find out. The next weekend, I drove to the address listed on the invitation. It was outside the city, tucked away in a part of the countryside I hadn't visited in years. The house came into view after I rounded a bend in the road, and for a moment, I felt a strange mix of déjà vu and unease. It was striking, almost too perfect in its symmetry. The lines were clean, modern, but there was something else, something familiar in the way it was laid out. As I parked the car and walked toward the entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen this house before, even though I knew I hadn't. At the door, a man was waiting, tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore a dark suit, immaculately tailored, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Welcome," he said, extending his hand. "I'm the architect. I've been expecting you." I shook his hand, trying to hide my nerves. "Thanks for the invitation, but I'm still not sure why I'm here." His smile was thin, but not unfriendly. "You'll understand soon enough. This house, it's a reflection of you, a reflection of the choices you've made. Come, let me show you." The door creaked open, revealing the foyer, a large open space with high ceilings and a single chandelier casting soft light across the room. The walls were bare, but there was something striking about the simplicity of the design. It was elegant, almost unnervingly so, as though every detail had been meticulously chosen for a reason I couldn't yet understand. The architect motioned for me to follow him as we walked across the polished floor. "This house," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space, "is more than just walls and rooms. It's a reflection of your life. Each room is a moment, a decision. Some are small, insignificant on the surface, others are more pivotal." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How could you possibly know anything about my life?" He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I have a talent for these things. I study people. I understand how choices shape them." I didn't respond, but my mind raced. There was something unnerving about the confidence with which he spoke, as though he knew more about me than I knew about myself. As we walked deeper into the house, I couldn't help but feel that the walls were watching, holding secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. We stopped at the entrance to the first room, a simple wooden door with an old-fashioned brass handle. The architect paused, his hand resting on the doorknob. "This is where it begins," he said softly. "Your first major decision, the one that set everything else in motion." I stared at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's inside?" He smiled again, that same thin smile. "Open it, and you'll see." I hesitated for a moment before reaching for the door. The brass handle was cool under my hand as I turned it, pushing the door open slowly. The room beyond was dimly lit, and as I stepped inside, I felt an overwhelming sense of familiarity. It was a living room, my living room from when I was a child. The faded wallpaper, the old couch where my mother used to sit, the shelves lined with books that hadn't been touched in years. It was exactly as I remembered it. This is my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The architect nodded, standing just behind me. "Yes. This room represents your childhood, a time when the choices weren't yours to make. But there's more here than meets the eye. Look closer." I walked further into the room, feeling a strange sense of nostalgia wash over me. As I reached the center, I noticed something odd. The floor beneath my feet seemed uneven, like there was something buried just below the surface. I knelt down, running my hand over the carpet, and pulled it back to reveal a small trapdoor. I looked up at the architect, who was watching me with quiet anticipation. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Open it," he said softly. With shaking hands, I lifted the trapdoor. Beneath it was a small, dark space, and inside, I could see something glinting in the faint light. I reached down and pulled it out, a tiny, silver key. The weight of it in my hand felt heavier than it should have. "That key," the architect said, his voice low, "represents the first decision you didn't make. The first moment when you could have chosen differently, but didn't." I stared at the key, my mind racing. "What decision?" He tilted his head slightly, as though considering how much to tell me. "You were young, too young to fully understand. But there was a moment when you could have stood up for yourself, when you could have refused to follow the path laid out for you. But you didn't. And so the foundation of your life was set." I swallowed hard, trying to process his words. "I don't remember that." "Most people don't," he said quietly. "But the choices we make in childhood, they shape us in ways we can't always see. This room, it's the beginning of your story." I stood up slowly, the key still clutched in my hand. "What am I supposed to do with this?" The architect smiled again, that strange, knowing smile. "Hold on to it. You'll need it later." We left the childhood room behind, stepping back into the hallway. The architect led me deeper into the house, his footsteps quiet on the polished floor. I couldn't stop thinking about the key, about the way he had described that first decision, or lack of decision. It felt like a burden now, heavy in my pocket. "This next room," the architect said as we stopped in front of another door, "is one of the most significant. A moment where your entire life could have gone in a different direction." I frowned, my heart racing again. "What moment?" "You'll see," he said simply. I pushed open the door, stepping into the room beyond. This one was different, larger, with high ceilings and tall windows that let in soft, diffused light. In the center of the room was a desk, and on the desk was a letter. I recognized it immediately. It was a letter I had received years ago, a job offer, one that I had turned down. At the time, I had thought it was the right decision, but now, seeing it here, in this strange, surreal house, I wasn't so sure. "This," the architect said, stepping up beside me, "is one of your most important moments. The decision to stay where you were, rather than take a risk and accept the offer." I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. "How do you know about this?" "I told you," he said, his voice calm. "This house is built from your life. Every choice you've made, every path you've taken, it's all here." I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. "But how? How could you know this?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the letter. "What if you could go back? What if you could make a different choice?" I swallowed hard. "That's impossible." "Is it?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "What if I told you that some choices are never truly final, that some decisions can be revised?" I looked at him, my mind racing. "What do you mean?" "There are moments," he said softly, "where the path you didn't take still lingers, where the alternate version of your life is still within reach. This room represents one of those moments." I stared at the letter, my heart pounding. "Are you saying I could go back? Change things?" The architect smiled again, but this time there was something darker in it. "In a way, yes, but you must be careful. Changing one decision will change everything that comes after it." I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. "What do I do?" "That's up to you," he said, stepping back. "But remember, not all revisions lead to a better outcome. Some choices once made cannot be undone." I stood there, staring at the letter, my mind swirling with possibilities. I had spent years wondering what my life would have been like if I had taken that job. Now, standing in this strange house, it felt like I was being given a second chance. But the architect's warning echoed in my mind. Not all revisions lead to a better outcome. We left the room with the letter behind, and the architect led me further into the house. Each step felt heavier now, weighed down by the choices I had already made, and the ones I hadn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being tested, that this house was more than just a reflection of my life. It was a judgment. The architect stopped in front of another door, this one larger than the others. "This room," he said quietly, "is the culmination of your decisions, the moment where everything converges." I stared at the door, my heart pounding. "What's inside?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "This is the room where you face the final decision, the one that will define everything that comes after." I swallowed hard, my hand trembling as I reached for the door. I wasn't sure I was ready for this, but I had come too far to turn back now. I pushed open the door, stepping into the room beyond. It was a small room, almost claustrophobic, with no windows and a single chair in the center. On the wall opposite the chair was a mirror, tall and imposing. But there was something wrong with the reflection. It wasn't just a mirror, it was a window into another version of my life. "This," the architect said, his voice quiet but firm, "is the life you didn't choose." I turned to him, my heart aching. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," he said softly, "you need to understand that every choice has a price. This is what you could have had, but it's also what you've lost." I stared at the reflection, tears welling in my eyes. The version of me in the mirror seemed happier, more fulfilled. But as I watched, I began to notice something else, cracks in the surface, flaws that hadn't been there at first. The life I saw wasn't perfect. It had its own struggles, its own pain. "Every life," the architect said, stepping up beside me, "has its burdens, even the ones we think are better." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "So, what's the point of all this?" "The point," he said, turning to face me, "is that you can't escape your choices. You can only accept them. The life you have is the one you've built. And while you may wonder about the path not taken, it's important to remember that no life is without its struggles." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. "This house," he continued, "isn't about regret. It's about understanding. Understanding that your choices have shaped you, but they don't define you. You are more than the sum of your decisions." I looked at the mirror one last time, then turned away. The architect was right. I couldn't change the past, and even if I could, there was no guarantee that the life I imagined would be any better than the one I had. We walked back through the house in silence, the weight of what I had seen pressing down on me. Each room we passed felt different now, less intimidating, less overwhelming. I understood finally what the architect had been trying to show me. When we reached the front door, he turned to me, his expression calm. "You've seen the house. You've seen your life. Now it's time to move forward." I nodded, feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't had before. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for showing me this." He smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him. "It was always your house. I just helped you see it." With that, he opened the door, and I stepped out into the fading light of the afternoon. The house stood behind me, a monument to my life, my choices. But as I walked away, I realized that it was no longer a prison. It was a reflection, nothing more, nothing less, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I was in control of my own story, and that was enough.